Okay, so we're going to go over the worksheet 7, the portion that is meant to be done in Unity. Just for the video, I already told my class this, but if I sound weird in part of it, I did break a tooth last night, so I'm doing this as best as I can with a broken tooth, so I'm trying not to sound too funny. But let's just start with the first question. The whole point of these, there's only 4, is to practice doing value returning functions. And we've worked with void functions before, but value returning functions are new, but they're super useful. And let me see if I can grab, it's not in there. Where is that? Let me go to the, sorry, I'm looking for a resource. Let's go to PowerPoints. We used to do these in the same week, so the PowerPoint is kind of comboed with another topic. But we do have a for loops and value returning functions. Don't worry about the for loops yet, but if we scroll down, we can talk a little bit about functions, and this will just be also good review for functions in general, because we've worked with them for a while now, since the beginning pretty much, but we've only been working with what's been called void functions. And void functions just work where you call it, and then it runs some code, and then it's done. We signify it's a void function because we put the void in front of it. You might have been wondering, why is it called a void function? Like, where does that word come from? Because it's kind of a weird sort of word. The reason is because the sister example of a function that goes with it is a value returning function. So it's either void because nothing is being returned, or we are going to return a value. And we just do that by declaring, when we're typing out the function name at the top, what type of value is going to be returned, and then somewhere inside of that function we eventually have to have a return statement. You can have multiple return statements, like if you're going to have like an if statement, you could say if something, return this, else return this. So don't feel like you can only have one, but once your code reaches its first return, that function stops and hops back to where it was called. So keep that in mind with that. Let's see. And the big takeaway with this, and I know some other languages do it a little bit different, but with C#, you can only return one value. You can't return multiple values. You can't return like 2 ints or 3 ints. You can only always return just one. And anything that we pass to it, like say like, for instance, we're doing like an add function. Those parameters, if we send 2 numbers to it, like they don't get changed when we make alterations to it. And you don't actually need any parameters for a value returning function, just like a void function. So this is a great example of a just like a basic value returning function where you have to tell it what type is going to be returned. Is it going to be an integer? Is it going to be a string? Is it going to be a game object? Like, what are you going to be returning? You give it a name, same style as any function name, you know, capitals with camel case. If you wish to send it parameters, you can, but it's not necessary. You then have your curly braces, you have usually some kind of code, and then the big thing though is you do need some kind of return statement where you just say return something of that data type. There are some examples if you want some extra examples, but the big thing that's different is how we call value returning functions. With void functions, we just type the name in parentheses, semicolon, or we type the name parentheses with the parameters, semicolon. With value returning functions, it's important to make sure that you have something going to, that something's going to catch what you're returning. That's why they have down here, the format is you have some kind of variable, and then equal to, and then you do your function call. Keep in mind though that you can call value returning functions without something catching it. It's very easy to forget to do this the correct way because it's not necessarily wrong. But if you call a value returning function that doesn't have like a variable to catch it, it's just going to go off into the ether and never be seen again. So like you can't like extract it from somewhere. So for example, if you have a function that returns a string called last name, this one has first then make a variable called my last name. It then says my last name is equal to the last name function, so that when this returns, that string is going to be stored in here. So we can then just use this like any other variable. Yes, question? I'll have to come around in a minute. I'm just want questions about what I'm talking about right now. Are there any questions about this? It seems like a real simple concept, but I think once we get into it, I'm sure we might run into some issues. So that's kind of like the goal of today, is to kind of get used to working with value returning functions. So make sure that you get the first worksheet open. Remember, we're doing it in that template now. And take a stab at question 1 if you haven't already, with writing a value returning function called add that takes 2 parameters and returns an integer. If you do need help, now I can come around and help with that. If it's on your laptop, I can't help you with getting Unity open on your laptop. I would suggest just working with our computers. The what now? Okay, so what's not opening with it? Well, you can't open the worksheet that way. You have to open it up through the Unity Hub.
I tried it.
Is it hanging up? It looks like it's thinking. It's still loading. You might just need to work on our computers. There it goes. So worksheet 113. You're working in the wrong version. We're working in 2019.1.4, not 2019.1.14. Do you have that one installed?
That's the one I thought I was working on.
No, we've been working in .1.2. That's probably why you're running into issues with opening some of our stuff, because that's not the correct version. Which ones do you have installed? Just that one. I would suggest for today just working on our computers, because you are going to probably run into issues with that version and the one that we're working with. Who else needs help getting it installed or open? If you remember from last class, you're supposed to download the template project and copy this into the template project. Anybody else? Remember, we're working on that template and just copying over the weekly worksheet into it. Does anybody else need help getting that open? Do you have it downloaded on this one? Okay. I'm going to wait for a couple people. Like I said, if you feel like you have the worksheet done, I would still suggest just at least paying attention, even if you're working on a different Unity thing. Keep it open. The what?
I'm updating because after my Unity on here to start running.
Okay.
It's just a service.
Too bad you can work on our computers too. That is available to you.
Actually, go ahead and download it.
Okay. I would try to get caught up then, because I can't wait for you to download it. We've had a half an hour to get this open. Okay, so let's start with question 1. Below this question 1 event, create a value returning function called add. Add is 2 parameters sent to it, int first and int second. Add returns an integer. So let's just kind of define that down here. So make sure we are going below, because we don't want to actually do it inside of question 1. We're going to go below it. So since it's a value returning function, what are we returning? Based on the directions. An int. So we type int, and then we give it a name. It's supposed to be called add. We're sending it 2 parameters, an integer called first and an integer called second. We then need to go down and add our curly braces. Notice that we are getting an error, and that is okay. We can hover over, now that you've kind of done a little bit with debugging. You should have read about it. You should not be too scared. Oh, I need to push my screen, don't I? Okay, sorry. You should feel a little bit more confident with trying to figure out your errors. So let's kind of hover over this and see why it's yelling at us. What is this error? Worksheet 113.add, not all code paths return a value. So why do you think it's mad?
You forgot to put in a return.
Exactly. So whenever you tell it it's going to return something, even if you're not quite done coding it, it's going to ask you to return something. So it seems kind of silly for something this small, but I'm going to mention a way that I kind of deal with this as I'm going, because sometimes I like to go in and define all my functions, even if I'm not going to code them yet, just so I can use them in other parts of the code. When I do value returning functions, I usually create like a variable called like for this one it'd be called like int, like return int. And at the bottom, I just do a return and just do that return int. Like, let me make sure. Oh, let's just set that equal to -1. Is that why it's mad? It's just a dummy for now. But eventually in my code, I would set return int equal to something and actually return it. But notice that we no longer get the error. So I do this in the lab walkthrough too, because we have a bunch of value returning functions. I go in and just put like a variable called return something, and then I return it. Or you could even just go in and put in like a dummy return, just so it's not erroring out. Because it'd be nice to kind of get like the framework in place so that you can check it in Unity, and then go back in and code it all. So, but it seems silly for something like this, but it's okay. It's just a good habit to get into. So we need to take first and second and then return that value. So we're just going to say, rather than int return int equals -1, we can just say first plus second. And then we return it. This is the most basic of doing a value returning function, taking 2 parameters, doing something, and then returning the results. Are there any questions so far? Yes. It's going to take a while. I think in the future you just need to just not use your laptop in here and just prepare to use our computers, because it doesn't seem like it's been working for a couple of classes now. Other questions on how this was written out? We still do need to do our calls though, because up here we need to create an integer variable called sum and call the add function and send 2 integers of your choice. So we're doing the very basics of how to call a value returning function. So we're going to make an integer called sum, and we're going to call add. So we're going to say add, and I think we just get to give it whatever numbers we want. If you want to be fancy, we could just do random.range. You know, this isn't necessary, but we could do this. If we're trying to be, so we would say the sum, call add. We're going to get a random number for first, a random number for second, and send that to here. We're going to get that first number, second number, add them together, and return it. So it's going to say return, and it's going to come and spit out this integer, and it's going to come and store inside of sum. So kind of think of it like a path like that of if we're returning, where is it going? This will not error if we just do add. So keep this in mind. This isn't necessarily wrong. There are reasons you might want to call a value returning function that we don't actually catch anything with it. So it's very easy to do this by mistake when you don't mean to. So this is wrong. You might want to make a note to yourself, like, don't do this. This is wrong. Nothing will catch the return. Because this is spitting something out. So where's it going to spit it into? It's spitting it into nothing. Up here, it's spitting it into this sum variable. So it's very important. This is where a lot of students get kind of hung up, is where they call their value returning integers. Last step, we need to change the question 1 text. This one should be easy. Question 1 text.text. And I'm going to be fancy and just say the sum is sum. And I'm going to save it, and I'm going to check it, and then I'm going to come around and help people who need help with this one. There it goes. Come on. Let's go. There it goes. The sum is 11, and since we are doing a random number, we should get a random number each time we click that button. So let me put my code back up, and I will come around and help anyone who is having a problem with this. So here is the code. 1 second. How far are you into getting it open? So this is the miscellaneous files. Is this the one that was in the zip? You need to, where's the template project that we're working in? Did you download that? So we got that one, but go to, if you remember, I demoed this last class, you have to go to and get that. And that's the project you're supposed to open. But I'll help you get this in there once you get that project open. Yes, question?
Is there a way to connect this to Google?
You don't have the template open. You're supposed to guys, make sure you're downloading that template in the Dropbox. In the Dropbox worksheet, there's the SG1, the template file at the top. You're supposed to open it and copy your code over into it. I demoed that last class. I said take notes, make sure you're doing this each time. This is how we're doing worksheets from here now on out. Are you doing? Okay. Maybe not watch videos during class. That'd probably be helpful. Who else is having an issue getting this? Okay, let's turn this off. Did you actually copy your code over into this? So double click that. No. Let's copy all this before we, like the whole thing, hit Control-C, and let's close Visual Studio, and let's open it again. Go to the top. Let's see. Okay, what's this one? Is that the old one? So I'll close that for now. Okay, so let's save this. Let's go back here. Yeah, we'll see what happens. It might have just been kind of confused. No. Did the button somehow get unhooked?
Yes.
Yeah, just hit, drag the UI controller over. It might have just, depending on what method, just hit the question one. They're showing up. Is the script on the UI controller? Oh, this gets so messed up. Drag that into there, that's probably why it's confused. Yeah, I think just some order of operations got messed up. You're gonna have to hook up all those text objects again. Opening it. What stage you up to? So open up that worksheet 113. And open up the one for this week. So select everything in here. Control C, hop over to the next one, highlight everything, and just completely replace it. And save it. And let's go back, let's close the old one. And we're going to be doing this every week. This is how the worksheets are going to be from here on out. And hit play just to make sure that everything is good to go. Oh, what error is it having? Okay, yeah, didn't quite finish it yet. Okay, so you're caught up though. It looks like you can get caught up from here. Who else is having an issue? Does anyone else need me to look at something? I'm going to go on to question 2. Yes?
So, I have the code in here.
Did your UI controller somehow get disconnected from the script? No? Check the button. Make sure the button is still connected. Question 1 button. You're in the game mode, so you can't. No, it's connected. So did you actually change the text in your script? Close all your visuals. Well, select all of this in case, but select it all. You're missing one of your curly braces. Just do edit. Select all. Control C to copy. Close all the versions of Unity you have open. Now open up the worksheet. Yeah, your number code is in here. So let's select all again. Control A. Control V to paste. And now save it. I would close whatever that is. Like, I don't know where, yeah, whatever you're working is a miscellaneous file, so it's not the one that was in your project.
All right, thank you.
Who else is having an issue? Because it's looking for 2. One number and a second number. You're sending it one number. No. It's looking for you to send 2 numbers. You're sending it one number. Why don't you look at my code and see the difference between your code and my code? Who else?
It's giving me a runtime for
Did you, because you didn't hook up your text, you didn't fix this. I don't know how your controller got so jacked up, but none of these got. Those all got disconnected somehow. I don't know how you opened it. Yes, question.
Yeah, it's not working.
Did you copy your code into?
Oh, it's working now. What? I didn't change that.
Are you almost caught up?
Yeah,
You haven't defined add yet. I have a whole new function. So let's start talking about question 2. Below this question 2 event, create a value returning function called capitalize. Capitalize has one parameter sent to it, a string called original word. Capitalize returns a string. Capitalize function takes the string, turns all the letters into capitals, and returns the new string. Hint, this is really easy. Try Googling it. So we're going to kind of just step through the process because, again, this is a really good practice question for what if you need to do something but you're not quite sure how to do it. It seems like, we didn't quite go too deep into strings and how to manipulate strings, since a lot of times, at least when you're doing games, you're not doing too much string manipulation, but it's still you might still need to know how to do some of it. So we're going to see if we can find that information somewhere. So first, let's write our function. So since we're returning a string, what's the first thing I need to do? Type. What should I type? Well, it should actually be a private string, but we could just type string. We only call it public if we need to see it in Unity, and we're never going to call this function in Unity, so we would actually do private, or we could just say string. And we are going to name this capitalize. We are sending it a string called original word. Again, we're getting kind of an error, so I'm just going to take the opportunity to make a string variable called toReturn. And I'm going to return toReturn. I know it's kind of silly. Let's just set that equal to nothing. But this way we no longer have errors. Like, what if we were just kind of defining this and then later we're going to come back and code it? So it's kind of nice just to get rid of those errors. So what we want to do is take whatever we're sending it and we want to make it all in caps. And I wouldn't have asked you to do this if it wasn't something that was really easy. So let's just go to Google and Google C# capitalize all letters. And it's looking like we're getting some stuff. So geeksforgeeks.org is pretty good. Just going to Microsoft, this docs.microsoft.com is good too. Since C# is kind of nested in with Microsoft stuff, might as well go to the source of it. So if we click on toUpper, that sounds, let's see, returns a copy of this string converted to uppercase. That sounds exactly like what we want to do. How do we use it? Let's scroll down and see if they have some examples. Oh, look, they do. So let's see. String 2 is equal to string1.toUpper. So that seems like it's pretty easy. We probably don't really have to worry about that stuff. Sometimes they go a little bit overboard, but it's just calling toUpper. So let's try that out. Let's see if we can do that. So string toReturn is equal to original word dot toUpper. And as I start typing it, notice that we do want to autocomplete that. The one thing we can't forget though, is we do need those parentheses on the end. That's it. That's how you capitalize all of a word, is this .toUpper. And the information was pretty easy to find. If you don't quite like this website, like I said, this one's probably pretty good. String toUpper, it gives some examples like input string this, then it does that variable string .toUpper and it capitalizes it. So there's a lot of resources for looking things up. They're usually pretty straightforward on how to use stuff like this. So that's it for our capitalize value returning function. We still need to call it. Call your capitalize function with whatever word you want. change the value of the question 2 text to what gets returned from capitalize. We could do this in all one line of code. I'll kind of break it up still so you can see how, step by step how to do it, but if you wish to do it in all one line, feel free. But we're going to just make a new string called to capitalize. And we're going to set that equal to capitalize. And we need to give it a word to capitalize. And you might as well just give it like your name in lowercase, because it's asking for a word. So we're gonna say, hey, this string variable, store whatever this capitalize string, whatever it sends back, store that inside of here so we can deal with it later. We are going to then store it in the question 2 text.text. We just set that equal to capitalize. If you wanted to do this all in one line of code, you could just do question 2 text.text is equal to capitalize with your name. This is the same as doing it this. We just didn't declare that in-between variable to store it before we put it in there. So whichever way you want to do it, you don't actually need both in here, but if you want to kind of make a note that, these are the same thing, this is just less line of code. So we can save it. I'm going to double check that it is working in Unity. And I get my name in all caps. My question 1 still works too. So I'm going to keep this up. If you need help, I will come around and help. If you're confident, you can go to question 3. Please help. Yes. Why is it string or original word? Who else needs help? Anybody? Yep. You haven't done the first part yet. Where is your capitalize function? Yeah, if it's not finished, you're going to get errors. First thing is string, not sting. This is not spelled that. If it helps, why don't you zoom in some? Change that to 100% to something like, you can do like 200%. It's a little bit easier to read for you. Because like, you just called it original word, not original world. And you have to return something. So you forgot the last line. You also didn't call your string correct. That's not how you set a string equal to something. And you didn't call to capitalize correct. Make sure it's looking exactly like how I type it, other than your name is different. Sorry. Who else? Yes.
Pretty sure that's something the singing things work.
Well, take out one of the calls, like either the one that's 2 lines or the one that's 1 line, and just delete them or comment them out. Save it, and let's run it again. Let's see what happens. I don't know what it was. Maybe you had forgotten to save it between making alterations. What error are you having?
We'll be, no, try to look at the next one.
Okay. Great.
99%.
Okay. What else? Okay, so let's go on to question 3. Below this question 3 event, create a value returning function called toPrint. It should have 3 parameters sent to it. 3 string variables named first, middle, and last. It will return a string. This function takes 3 separate strings and concatenates them together into one with a space between them. Example, if the 3 words sent to it are first, second, and third, it will return this string looking like that. So let's work on that. So let's go below, and we are returning a string. We are calling it toPrint, and we are sending it 3 strings. String first, string second, first, middle, and string last. We have a challenge of doing this all in 1 line of code, so I'm going to just do this in 1 line of code. I'm going just for some practice. If you need to separate it out, that's fine, but let's take on that challenge. We're going to return first plus our space plus second, middle plus a space plus last. If you really needed to separate that out and do like string to return is equal to this and then return that string, that's fine. But there's nothing against, like, we can do this. Like, there's nothing wrong with this. Less lines of code. In the question 3 event, call your toPrint function so it changes the question 3 text to what it returns. So again, let's do it in 1 line of code.
It keeps on correcting.
Question 3 text dot text is equal to toPrint, and let's just give it first, middle, and last. Save it, pop over to Unity, and let's try question 3. So we're expecting it to be formatted nicely. First, middle, last, and these ones still work too. So I'll come around and help with this one. Again, if you need to split these up into different lines just because your mind works a little bit better that way, that's fine. But I like to do the challenge. Who needs help with this one? Anybody? Yes. Question? Look at the difference between what you're doing. Ta-da. That should work. Who else? Yes. It's expecting a semicolon. It tells you what the problem is. So the previous line, you forgot your semicolon. No, the previous line. Who else needs help? All right, let's do the last one. The last one, we are going to be comboing stuff that we did in question 2 and question 3. So 3 strings have already been implemented into question 4 for you. Using only the capitalize and toPrint functions you made for previous questions, change the question 4 text to the name formatted nicely and all capitals. Challenge, do all of this coding with 1 line of code. I'll do it first with multiple lines of code, just so we can kind of look at it, and then I'll go back in and do it with 1 line of code. So we need to concatenate it nicely and then capitalize it. There's multiple ways that we could do this. We could just say, and I'm not going to do it this way, but I'll show you that this is, a potential way. We could say first is equal to first capitalize first, and this will just take what's being stored in there, capitalize it, return it, and kind of like overwrite it with a capitalization. But then we'd have to do that for first, middle, and last. So like we could do that. I think it would be better to make a full name string, a string called full name, and concatenate them first. So that we're getting our 1 line of code, so we don't have to upper first, middle, and last. So we can concatenate them first, and then we can say full name is equal to capitalize full name. To send it through, whatever is being stored in there, capitalize it, and then stick it back into that variable. If we wanted to do this in 1 line of code, it is possible. I'll kind of push it down here. Actually, I'll do it up here. Sorry. Like if you want to kind of make a note to yourself on how to do it in 1 line of code, we can say question 4 text.text is equal to, and we'll do capitalize, and then inside our parentheses, we'll do toPrint first, middle, last. Kind of like math. Order of operations. We start inside of our parentheses. So the first thing the code will do is this toPrint. So it's going to pretty much do what we just did right here. So it's going to concatenate these together. It then goes out to the next set of parentheses, which is capitalize. So then it's going to capitalize it, and it's going to spit out that string, and then it'll go into our question 4 text.text. So this is the same as this. And it can take a little bit with working with this stuff to kind of wrap your head around how this works. If you need to do it like this, there's nothing wrong with it in this stage. Just make sure you understand, like if you're feeling pretty confident, start to try to lessen the amount of lines of code that you're working with. So let me save this. Put that back over here. And we get it all in caps, and we get it all concatenated nicely, and we should be good to go. And are there any questions about the worksheet that aren't come take a look at my stuff? So, because that's it as far as like the worksheet goes. And I was going to turn off the recording when there's no more questions that don't require me to walk around. So if it's my thing's broken, come take a look at this. It's not the question I'm taking right now. It's just general questions about this. Yes.
For the last thing, which
Uh-huh.
one would you recommend?
I would do it this. If you know how to do it, this is better coding. But like I said, this isn't wrong. And if you're new to coding and you're still not confident in your abilities, there's nothing wrong with spelling it out. So like they're both correct. You want to move towards this to become a better coder. Yes, question.
Is there a way to just capitalize the first letter?
Yes, there are. C sharp, capitalize, first letter. Let's see. It gets into things though, and like I don't want to get into how to do it. Like it gets into stuff that we haven't done yet, quite yet, but it is possible. You have to, if you know stuff about arrays, strings are technically arrays. You have to kind of access the first character and change like to upper just the first character. So it is possible. I wouldn't worry about it yet. Other general questions? Okay, let me turn this off and I can come around and help people individually.